tracing and vouching, okay? Tracing and vouching, probably not gonna get to fraud today, that's too bad. Tracing and vouching, remember we said you trace to get evidence of completeness of some sort of account, like in this case, sales. We're vouching, right, from the sales journal to a shipping document, we would be vouching for occurrence, right? Both of those are examples of substantive procedures, right? That's called a dual direction test. A dual direction test is a test where if you perform the test in one direction, going from the system to supporting documentation, you're getting evidence for one assertion. If you go in the opposite direction, going from support to the system or the financial statement accounts, you're getting evidence of another assertion. The directions, dual direction testing. That is different than what's called dual purpose testing. You do have to know both. Dual purpose testing says that the test has two purposes. A test can be both a test of control and a substantive test, which is why I told you way back when to have very good definitions of these, because at one point, we're going to talk about how it can be both. In our previous example, I love tracing and vouching, okay? Our previous example talked about a sales journal right? And we said that the auditor could look to see if somebody performed what's called a three-way match and compare the shipping document, the sales order. Next week, you're going to have to really pay attention to those three documents because they're going to change when we get into payables. You have to have the documents right. So we're talking about sales. If the auditor got a sample of sales from the sales journal, so that's the what or the item, the number 2 thing, and they vouched a sample of sales transactions. So vouch a sample of sales transactions. That's the item from the sales journal to the shipping documents, sales orders, and sales invoices. What's that fourth part? What's the purpose of this test? Test completeness? No. To remember, I told you that it's always going to relate back to the account because the assertions over a financial statement account. So when I ask you completeness of what? Sales. Occurrence of what? Sales. Right? Cash, same thing. It's always going to be an assertion related to a financial statement account. Remember that. So here, the purpose would be to test completeness of sales. Now, if the auditor then went from these documents, see if it was included in the sales journal. So they went from shipping document, sales order, sales invoices to sales journal. What's the purpose of that test? Yes. So it's to test completeness of sales or the sales journal. Yes. You will have to do these things on your exam. Right? So here they were vouching to test occurrence. Here they're vouching or tracing to test completeness. That is a dual direction test. But what if while the auditor was vouching sales, right? They examined these documents because they had to, right? They had to see if this was evidence. And they noticed that each one of these documents on October 1st was initialed by the revenue clerk that they had performed a three-way match. What would that be an example of? The auditor, when they were doing this vouching test, looked at these 3 documents that they had in their possession and saw, amongst all the information, that there was initials and dates that a three-way match had been performed. That was the same example of a test of controls I gave you about 10 minutes ago. So in this case, if the auditor, while they had these documents, saw that Jerry in recording had performed a three-way match prior to recording that sale in the system because you have the sales journal, that's a test of controls. You saw that evidence that that control, that procedure had actually happened. You saw evidence that Jerry performed a three-way match to record the sale that you got from the sales journal. That makes that a test of control. So in this case, that's what's called a dual purpose test. It's both a test of details. How do you know it's a test of detail? Because you have an account and you have assertions, right? By definition, we said when the auditor is testing the details of management's assertions, occurrence, over a financial statement account, sales, that's a test of details. That's a substantive test. But the fact that when we audited it, we got evidence that a three-way match, a procedure, had been performed, that's a test of control. So this would be an example of what's called a dual purpose test. A dual purpose test is a test that is both a substantive test, and a test of control. Remember, to make it a procedure, you have to make it an action. So the auditor looking at or examining the initials and the date on those documents makes it a test of control, right? Because remember, a control is an action, it's a procedure. So the auditor has to go to determine if that action had happened, if it's working. Okay. So these, if you say shipping document, that's just a document. If you say the auditor vouched a sample of sales transactions from the sales journal to the shipping documents, that's a test of detail or a vouching procedure. If you say the auditor prepared the shipping document, sales order, and sales invoice for evidence that someone had made that comparison prior to reporting in the sale journal, that's a test of control. So if they do all of these procedures together, it's a dual purpose test.